What's going on? Welcome back to Under the Spotlight. Next up, Star Wars Starfighter. Special.
Is he okay? Sort of.
Star Wars Starfighter released on the PlayStation 2 on February 21st and the Xbox on November 15th in 2001, respectively.
Word, can I borrow that? You got a PlayStation 2?
While the PlayStation 2 release did receive fairly positive reviews, there was a significant amount of people that still at the time didn't see much in what it had to offer, especially where it was priced at $50. Holy crazy that used to be an expensive game back in the day. That's wild, man.
Well, now I'm depressed.
When the game was initially marketed, it was promised to be the definitive space flight simulator experience within the Star Wars family of video games. Obviously, this made fans incredibly excited for what was to come, especially because the last time we saw anything like this was on the Nintendo 64 with Rogue Squadron. So LucasArts, along with British game developer Blitz Games, would go on to promise the release of the exact thing fans have been dreaming about for the past 3 years. And honestly, it's very easy to argue that they achieved what they set out to do. The game performed incredibly well, selling a significant amount of copies on the system within its first year, prompting LucasArts to further its experimentation in the console video game market. They would quickly reach out to the team at Microsoft about developing a more refined edition of the game for the most powerful console of its time, the Xbox. This is where it gets a little bit dramatic. Microsoft's development team would arrive at that year's E3, incredibly excited to reveal their plans for the upcoming Xbox release, only to be absolutely blindsided by some unexpected news. Unknown to them, Nintendo had been hard at work with their friends Factor 5 on a brand new Star Wars flight experience as well, the heavily anticipated Rogue Squadron 2. Microsoft, absolutely irate at this news, would attempt to have the Nintendo project shelved temporarily or altogether canceled. They didn't care the outcome, they just knew they wanted to be the only game on the market at the time. Obviously, as time went on to tell, they failed, but would kickstart a fierce determination to outshine the rival release by releasing a superior product in time for that year's Black Friday. Does Starfighter follow through on any of those promises? And does it hold up enough to warrant any of your time or money? Let's go find out. Starfighter is a really unique experience, I'm gonna be honest, and maybe doesn't deserve the smoke I tossed at it in the last video, or maybe it did. I'm no judge.
This is Judge Judy.
It's one of the few games I've covered so far on the channel that I actually did have an opportunity to play during my childhood, and just like I did when I was a kid, I struggled.
Maybe you're just tired.
The game hits you with this unique flight mechanic almost immediately, which I will be upfront about. It actually adds a lot to the experience, but it takes a minute to get used to, and quite a few of them at that.
That's a lot.
The easiest way I can explain it without you experiencing it yourself, whenever you let off the throttle of your ship, you just kind of drift in the direction that you were going, and none of your movements really will influence where you go until you start accelerating again. It's so much fun. It can really dissuade you from pushing a little bit further in the game if you can't get the feel for it quick enough.
You just suck.
But once you get a hold of it, it adds so much depth to the movement and possibility of how to achieve. What am I doing? Of possible solutions there are to certain scenarios that will play out in the game, making each attempt unique on its own. You almost feel like you want to lose or restart a level because you didn't do something cool enough. And that's really fun. That's not something that's too common in games, whether retro or modern. That is an absolute standout shining gem with Starfighter. I don't think the movement could be any better. And again, while admittedly it can take a minute to get used to, and you may never get used to it fully at all, it makes the game so much more fun than what it probably would have been if they went with a more standard the mechanic. As for how the game plays out, progression in the game is honestly no different than what you'd expect. It's a level-by-level system where you play as one of 3 characters in various ships over 14 story levels. Story events in the game occur parallel to Episode 1, which means we get a lot of... But other than subtle references throughout, and the absolute celestial soundtrack, the connection to the cinematic release gets lost in a mediocre story that could occur at any point in the Star Wars timeline and offer the exact same amount of narrative significance.
It's good. Really? Yeah, it was good.
It's not absolutely trash, it's just nowhere near enough to be the standalone reason you should seek out this game. Although not the most interesting, it does serve its purpose fairly well, I have to admit. Along with the great level of pacing present in the game, the narrative does distract you enough to keep the game from feeling repetitive. And this is honestly largely in thanks to stellar performances from the voice actors.
Disable that freighter, Nim.
Time for a little target practice. My energy bomb should knock these baby shields down in no time.
The super freighters are powering up their hyperdrive. Hurry up and disable one of them before they hyper up.
Do I have to do everything myself?
Hurry! Cargo's on board. They know we're heading for the cave. There's a blockade set up along the land route to the cave. We can't hold this position any longer. We've got to head to the cave.
Let's say that wasn't the case though. Starfighter would still remain in the conversation solely because it remains a solid gaming experience. And on the topic of the overall experience, I can't help but find it funny that they were threatened by the release of Rogue Squadron 2. The games play nothing alike. Outside the fact that they share the same property, Star Wars, there's nothing else. That's where it ends. Hard stop. Rogue Squadron leans heavily into the realistic approach while Starfighter stays true to an arcade experience. It offers enough and distances itself more than enough, in my opinion, from its competition to stand out as a respectable title on its own. It just leaves me thinking what else we could have seen from the project if their focus wasn't so distracted by what was going on at Nintendo. But at the end of the day, they absolutely nailed it. Now that the gameplay is said and done, is Starfighter something you should bother picking up to play yourself? It isn't collectible by any means, so if that's all you're looking for, you can definitely skip on this one or seek out other methods to experience the game.
Emulation systems activated.
But if you're either a Star Wars fan or enjoy a decent flight simulator experience with a bit of an arcade twist, this is definitely one that's worth grabbing if you see it in the wild. During its recorded history, of course adjusting for inflation, the price hasn't fluctuated much, if at all, I'm gonna be honest. Coming in at roughly $8 loose and $12 complete Canadian, this is a game that should sit on everybody's retro game shelf in my opinion, especially if you own either an Xbox, a PlayStation 2, or both. I do have to say in my research, I found a lot of people saying that the PlayStation 2 experience is a little bit lacking where the game suffers a bit of performance issues. The consensus remained that it is well worth experiencing on the initial console. So what are you waiting for? Buy it!